Okay, class, lecture number 19. All right, we're moving on here, folks. We're going to be through with this course before you know it. Last time we were together, we talked about D-Day, Operation Overlord. And it took place on 6th of June in 1944. Wonderful place to visit, to go to Normandy beaches there. France is always fun. All right, we mentioned that about Eisenhower, Dwight David Eisenhower, one of my favorite heroes anyway, 5-star general. Interesting career, by the way, graduate of West Point. People refer to him as Ike. You don't call him Ike, you call him General Eisenhower. All right, we also mentioned that about the slow breakout of the Normandy Peninsula there, and then finally it was off to the races as the Allies liberated Paris, if you will, and on into the area which we is today recognize as Luxembourg and Belgium, and the Battle of the Bulge, in which the United States forces were literally caught with our pants down here, folks. We were. Fortunately, we were able to recover, primarily because the Germans just ran out of petroleum. They ran out of fuel. Benzene is what the Germans call it. We call it gasoline. All right, and eventually the Allies were ordered to stop at the Elbe River. I'm talking about the British and also that the Americans allowed the Soviets to catch up a little bit. As a result of that, Soviets took over Berlin, and they will maintain control of much of Berlin for the next 45 years or so. And also Prague, which is in the Czech Republic today. Wonderful place to visit, by the way. All right, somewhere through here, we mentioned that about the VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. We talked about the Holocaust. We have a lot of time with the Holocaust. Very, very touching, sensitive subject there. You can really get yourself deep into that subject if you allow yourself to do so, like I have. But anyway, and we mentioned Anne Frank. Anne Frank, you know, the autobiography of a young girl, the diary of a young girl. Interesting account of that. Rosie the Riveter. These were women that were supporting the war effort. In fact, I hope you listen to the little video clip, and it really is listening to the video clip because they had that catchy little phrase there about Rosie the Riveter, the song. In fact, I listened to it once yesterday, and it so inspired me. I'll listen to it again today. You know, I like that little catchy tune. Mentioned Japanese Americans, and then we went into the 1944 presidential election, and for the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he is elected for a 4th term in office, but he is a very, very sick man. So the Vice President is that Harry S. Truman. You know what S stands for, and I won't refresh your memory on that. So anyway, I want to go back to my camera here, and I want to tell you about Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt will die on the 12th of April in 1945. And he was a young man, as a matter of fact. He was only 63 years of age, but as I told you before, you know, he smoked cigarettes and drank a little bit of gin. I don't think it was excessive. In fact, I think his cigarette smoking was limited to 1 pack a day. But where I want to carry you to as we get started today, let's go to Warm Springs, Georgia. And you got to remember that the president had polio. And so in Warm Springs, it's known for its thermal waters, its hot water baths. And so the president had a little, shall we say, a home in the Confederacy, or a home in the South in Georgia. It's down below Plains, Georgia. It's an interesting place to visit there. Go there today if you wish to do so. You'll have to purchase a ticket for most of that, but some of it is free too. So anyway, let's go to my camera here, and I want to show you the home there of Franklin Roosevelt. It's called the Little White House, located in Warm Springs, Georgia. If I can get it all placed up there. It's run by the National Park Service today, and you can actually go inside this home here, and right inside the front door, right inside there, that's where the president was seated on the 12th of April in 1945. And he was seated there having his portrait painted. And before I show you what that portrait looks like, if you go to that place, you can see this is the front porch, the entranceway, not the front porch, the entranceway. Well, I guess it is front porch. And there's a president who was in one of his cars, and I've told you this before, he loved to drive. And he had these cars that had hand levers that would operate the accelerator and the brakes and the clutch. I've told you that before. And he would actually take a spin and go out into the countryside. I can't even imagine that. One of my students told me a story about her grandfather worked for a CCC camp, and the CCC camp was actually guarding the Warm Springs. And her grandfather was at one of the entrances, and his car came up and stopped, and the grandfather, who was a young man at that time, stopped the car, and he said, "You can't go in." And FDR said, "Well, I live here." And grandfather, CCC guy said, well, this is where the President of the United States lives. And FDR said, well, I'm the President of the United States. And so anyway, the guard actually carted the President, before he would allow him to come in. That's an interesting story from one of my students. All right, and I'll show you the portrait here that was being painted. It's an unfinished portrait. Today, if you go there, you can see the unfinished portrait. I have one on my wall in my classroom. Excuse me, some of you will see this. Probably all of you will see it at one point or not. But it was at this point of completion. It wasn't completed, but it was at this point, almost completed, when suddenly the President reached up, grabbed the sides of his head, and he said, I'm having a terrible headache. And he collapsed. And when he did collapse, he was carried over into the adjacent room here. Let me see if I can find it. There it is right there. Carried into the bedroom, and he was placed on the bed, and he died. Today, you can go into that room if you wish to do so. There are signs there that clearly tell you to not touch the bed. But if you wait until the park rangers have their back turned, you can reach over and touch the bed. Don't do that. That is not the right thing to do here, my friends. Okay, so anyway, and FDR at that time was with his mistress, and Lucy Mercer Rutherford, by the way. Never very loyal individual. His body was returned to Hyde Park, and that's where he lies in rest today, along next to his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. She died a few years after that. But anyway, it's kind of a fun place to visit. So I thought I'd point that out to you good folks here as we move on. Now, we need to get this war, we need to bring this war to a close. And I told you at an earlier time that it's projected that if we have these invasions, these land invasions of Japan on the islands of Honshu and Kyushu, that it was estimated that we would incur about 1 million casualties. And I told you at that time, what if we could develop a weapon of mass destruction that would bring this war to a close in the snap of a finger? So what we're going to do here, my friends, and this is during the times in which FDR was still alive, we approved a plan which was called the Manhattan Project, and this was to develop an atomic bomb. Now, for the Germans, Enrico Fermi, an Italian physicist, and Albert Einstein, a former German, I guess he is still German, and he wrote a letter, both those individuals wrote a letter to the President of the United States, and they informed him that some German scientists, Otto Hahn, Lisa Meitner, and a guy by the name of Strassman here had developed a technique to undergo atomic fission of the uranium atom. And so that's what initiated the process there. Fritz Strassman was his name. That initiated the process here of the Manhattan Project to develop an atomic bomb. $2 billion was devoted to this cause. We'll go back to the camera here, $2 billion. We had research laboratories set up at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, Hanford, Washington. In fact, I was in Los Alamos, New Mexico just a couple months ago, as a matter of fact. All right, and so anyway, the research moved very, very quickly. It was a combination of British and Americans, but eventually the Americans took over the project entirely. The individual that we had as the project manager here, and I want you to recognize him, was J. Robert Oppenheimer. J. Robert Oppenheimer, let me show you what he looks like here. I'll show you a couple of photographs of him. Here is what J. Robert Oppenheimer looks like. He's 6'1", he weighs 115 pounds, smoked 5 packs of unfiltered Chesterfield cigarettes daily. His life existed around 3 products here, folks. Those 5 packs of Chesterfield cigarettes. And I kind of like that in a man, step up and challenge lung cancer. But really, he didn't even die of lung cancer in later years. But he also existed on coffee and existed on gin. So he had 3 products in his life here: coffee, gin, and cigarettes. All right, J. Robert Oppenheimer. Here's another likeness of him here, as I'll tell you a little bit more about him here. There he is on the this side here, and the kind of chubby general over here on the other side is Leslie Groves. Leslie Groves was the military official in charge of the project, but he is not a physicist. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a physicist, graduated from Harvard. He received a Ph.D. from the University of Göttingen, which is in Germany, by the way. He is Jewish. He had Jewish relatives that lived in Nazi Germany, if you will. He's affiliated with the Communist Party, not as much as his wife was. So that leaves a little bit of shadiness on him. But I like J. Robert Oppenheimer. He's one of my favorite individuals here. Okay, and Anyway, let's move on with this. Research moved very, very rapidly. What they were working on was fissionable plutonium, P-239, and fissionable uranium, P-235. Those were the two elements that they were working with. All right, so let me try to help you out with this a little bit. So on the 16th of July, 1945, near Alamogordo, New Mexico, that's where our White Sands National Park is located today. It's also where we have, I think it's Fort Holloman, Holloman Air Force Base, and White Sands Missile Range is located there. And that's where we developed the first atomic bomb, and we successfully tested it in Project Trinity right there in the White Sands. That area, I don't know if it's still hot today here, folks, but you're not allowed to go into that area except once a year. Once a year they open the gates and let you take a little 15-mile trek, which I've not done. I've been right by Alamogordo and looked out over White Sands Missile Range, but I've never been to the actual site where we had the first explosion there of Trinity. And a huge success. You can read more about that if you wish to do so. We have too much time on the things to go over today for me to spend the time to show you some photographs of that first blast. All right, so if you look at the date here, 16th of July, 1945, who was president? Who was the president? Well, it's Truman. FDR's already died. Now, Truman was not made aware of this project at this time. In fact, for Truman had only spoken to the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, face-to-face on 2 occasions. That was it. That was it. All right, so anyway, let's move on here. And that's just a refresher there that FDR died on that date. And where I want to carry you to is the Potsdam Conference. And I'll show you some photographs. In fact, I'll just show you photographs of the Potsdam Conference right now rather than to wait on this. And the Potsdam Conference is one of 4 conferences that took place during or shortly after the war. We'll go through those 4 after we finish this section here. But where it took place was at a place which is called a Sicilienhof. Sicilienhof. It's in Potsdam. It's in Potsdam. You'll have to purchase a ticket to go inside of it. That's what it looks like. And we can see here, here we see in the center there, that's Harry S. Truman. And the individual that is over here on this side, that's Joseph Stalin, the Soviet premier. Winston Churchill, who's over on this side. Looks like he's lost a little bit of weight, too. And by the way, for Winston Churchill, he had just recently lost the, or right at this time, lost the election as prime minister, if you can believe that. And he would be replaced by Clement Attlee right in the middle of the conference. So when you look at some of the photographs, at this Potsdam Conference, you'll see Churchill, and sometimes you'll see Clement Attlee there. And anyway, let's see, here's another photograph at the Sicilienhof. You see Stalin, which is on this side, Truman in the center there, and this is Churchill, which is present right there. And it was at the conference where an aide came up to Truman and told Truman, he said, he whispered in his ear and said, we have just successfully tested an atomic bomb. And Truman was unaware of that. But he leaned over to the other 2 guys that were there, Churchill and Stalin, and he said, we have developed a weapon of unusual magnitude, of unusual force. And Churchill made the statement, he said, it's a miracle of deliverance. And for Stalin just said, use it wisely here. As it turned out, Stalin was aware that we had tested an atomic bomb because Soviet spies had made him aware of it beforehand. Can't trust the Soviets, you honestly can't. All right, so anyway, Truman in turn issued an ultimatum. Remember that date was the 16th of July here. Oh, by the way, I didn't write that down. When Truman found out about it, it was on the 25th of July, about 9 days later. And Truman issued an ultimatum to Japan. Now, I want you to think about this hard here, folks. And issued an ultimatum, surrender by August the 3rd, 1945, or face complete destruction. Surrender by August the 3rd, or a complete annihilation will take place with that. Now, if you were Japan, what would you do? What would you do if you were Japan? You've been pushed back to the borders of Japan itself. We have full mobilization in Japan. Women, children are all called out, trained in national defense there. What would you do? Is Truman bluffing you? And so Japan ignored it. Actually, the Emperor Hirohito wanted to go ahead and surrender. But Tojo, the razor, he did not want to surrender. And so they delayed. So let's go on through this, folks. And sure enough, August the 3rd passed. August the 4th passed, August the 5th, and on August the 6th, the United States, with a airplane, which was a B-29. Did I write that down for you folks? I did. And this aircraft was known as the Enola Gay, 6th of August, 1945. It was piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets and went over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and dropped this uranium bomb, uranium-235 bomb, which was known as Little Boy. And he dropped that bomb. All right, now it was not a ground burst. This was a burst that was about 1,500 feet up into the air. And anyway, it leveled 4 square miles of Hiroshima. Gee, I don't know. I put down 80,000 killed. Who knows, folks? We have no clue about this. It may have been 150,000. People were literally vaporized. Their silhouettes were burned into the concrete. It was like an X-ray into the concrete. Yeah, I just happened to look over and saw this book here, which is called Hiroshima, showing you the blast over Hiroshima. It's written by John Hershey. It's a good book to read if you'd like to do that. And I'm not going to make it required reading, but nonetheless, that was it. Okay, so let me, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to stop right now. I've got a number of photographs to show you, good folks, but I will share this one with you. Because I don't have to switch back and forth on the cameras. But that is the blast that took place over Hiroshima. I'll show you photographs of Hiroshima in just a second. Some people refer to it as Hiroshima, by the way. And let's see here. And I'll ask you again, if you were Japan, what would you do now on the 6th of August? Would you surrender? I don't know. I think they were just shell-shocked with this. It was just too much to absorb there. And so they didn't surrender. And so the 7th passed, and the 8th of August passed, and the 9th of August passed, and now we return, only this time, to bomb Nagasaki. Hey, and by the way, the original city to be bombed was out of Kyoto. Kyoto had been a former capital of Japan, and it was deemed by Secretary of War Stimson at that time that this would be an inappropriate thing to bomb a former capital of Japan. So unfortunately, Nagasaki was selected. And this time we're going to have another bomb. This is a plutonium bomb, which is called Fat Man. The pilot of this aircraft, boxcar, which was another B-29, the pilot was Major Charles Sweeney. And I'll share this with you. This is from Boxcar, by the way. Boxcar. Anyway, so that was the second atomic bomb there. Again, I don't know how many people were killed here. Some estimates, I think your textbook says 100,000. Maybe it's 150,000, I don't know. One unfortunate individual, Japanese person, happened to be present at Hiroshima when the first bomb went off and was present at Nagasaki when the second bomb was detonated. And he survived, by the way. Okay, there's the blast that took place over Nagasaki. All right, so 2. Now, what would you do if you were Japan? Are you ready to throw in the towel? I think you're probably ready to throw in the towel. All right, so I'm going to go back myself here. I've got some things to show you here. We're going to use a couple of maps here. Let me get my lighting adjusted properly here. And I'll show you on the map of Japan where these bombs took place. Hiroshima is down here. Oops, you can't see that, so let me get this down like that. All right, and Hiroshima is down here. It's on the island of Honshu itself, and Nagasaki is down here. It's on the island of Kyushu. All right, so anyway, those are the two sites there, and Japan is ready to throw in the towel. Let me share some photography with you. The aircraft that's at the top there, that's the Enola Gay. Down at the bottom, that's a close-up of the Enola Gay. The individual right in the center, this is the pilot. Oops, I'm getting my fingers wrong. This is the pilot here, Colonel Paul Tibbets. Notice these very, very fit young men wearing shorts that are much too short for our times anyway. But the Enola Gay was named for the mother of Colonel Paul Tibbets. Now, the Enola Gay is very controversial here. Were we right, humanitarian-wise, were we right in dropping the atomic bomb on Japan? Well, as Truman said, I never lost a moment's sleep over this and making that decision to do this. One time it was planned to move the Enola Gay up to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. A lot of controversy with that, and you probably are not aware of this, but there's another annex to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. It's located over near Dulles Airport, and they moved the Enola Gay over there, very controversial, and what they finally ended up doing is just taking the nose section here and putting nose section on display there, and none of the other aircraft is displayed. I guess it's been destroyed or whatever. I have not seen that, by the way. I've been there in Space Museum a number of occasions, but not there. Okay, let's see what else we have. This is showing you, if I can get this position right here, this is showing you the aftermath of the bombing of Hiroshima. Like I said, it was 4 square miles. That would be, larger than the size of Jasper. You can see a few structures that are still standing there, concrete structures, but it was just destroyed. All right, it's been rebuilt today, by the way. Here are the 2 bombs here that were used. The one on the top there, that's Little Boy. Little Boy there, and it's a uranium bomb. That's up at the top, and one down below here, this is Fat Man, which was a plutonium bomb. And they named it Fat Man. They said it looked like Churchill, because he was so rotund, he was so fat. And anyway, I don't know. You have to draw your own conclusions on that. And let's see who else we have here. This was the blast that took place here at Nagasaki. All right, we'll move right along here as we muddle through these. And finally, Japan, actually, to tell you the truth, they didn't agree to surrender till the 14th of August, and then a formal surrender would take place in Tokyo Bay here on a U.S. ship, which is called USS Missouri. Mighty Mo was the name of the ship. We had Japanese officials there, we had American naval officials there and to sign that document. All right, and that'll bring us up here to, where am I at? That'll bring us up here to peace. Japan, I don't like to use words like this, but it says, Japs accept Allied terms unreservedly. Here is a photograph here of the USS Missouri. We still have it, my friends. It's still there. This is in Pearl Harbor. It's right next to the Arizona Memorial. As I said, right at Pearl Harbor set. And I ran across this article not too long ago, and it tells you that Colonel Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay on the Hiroshima bomb run, dies at the age of 92. And let's see if that's dated that. And I do not have that dated, but I can remember that was 5 or 6 years ago. Okay, here, class, got to bring this section to a close here. And let's just, here, I wrote down the dates right there. And as we end World War II, we're going to find that we had U.S. killed 405,399. Anyway, it was amazing with that. Yeah. One is too many here, my friends. Okay, so let's move right along here, folks. And that's going to bring us on into our next section, and this section is chapter 27, and it's on page 733, 732 in your textbook, and this section is going to be recognized as the Cold War, America's longest war, and in fact, in many ways, I think it is going on now. I really do believe the Cold War is taking place now. I would reference that. How's our relationship with China? Well, it's not very strong. It may improve. I don't know. How's our relationship with Russia? I don't know. It's not very strong. We very much distrust the Russians, and they very much distrust us. Okay, so the U.S. and the Soviet Union were never truly close. We distrusted them. They distrusted us. About the only time we were really close with them was during World War II. We had provided them with Lend-Lease. But anyway, there was just too many strong differences here. The Russians had backed out of World War I. We were distrustful of socialism and communism. And the Soviets were distrustful of industrial capitalism. So it was never a close relationship. All right, now the Grand Alliance is the United States and Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Now, Soviet Union, of course, is what Russia is today, or largely that anyway. And we refer to these individuals as the Big Three. Did I write that down? I did. As the Big Three. This would consist of the Premier, Joseph Stalin. I didn't even write his name out, so you'll have to write his name. Joseph Stalin, S-T-A-L-I-N. I think I've written that name for you before. We referred to him as Uncle Joe. And then we had Winston Churchill. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And then Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is the President of the United States. They're referred to as the Big Three. All right, now, during the war and shortly after the war, there will be several conferences to take place. Let's just get that out of the way momentarily. Several conferences will take place. One of these conferences that I've talked to you about earlier is known as the Casablanca Conference. Translate that, that's the White House. It does not take place at the White House. It takes place place in Casablanca. And it took place on January 1943, and only in attendance here was FDR and Churchill. And this was the time they made the decision for Operation Husky, which is the invasion of Sicily. Uncle Joe, Joseph Stalin, set this one out. In fact, he was pouting there. He was wanting a cross-channel invasion to take the pressure off of Russia against the Germans, and we just weren't ready for that, you know. So he set this one out, so it's just FDR and Churchill. The second conference that takes place is the Tehran Conference. This takes place in Iran, by the way. It will last from November 28 until December the 1st, 1943. And FDR and Churchill and Stalin were all present for that. Stalin had a morbid fear of flying. And so this was one of the, he did have to fly there, and he was unhappy with that. He was very displeased with it. Here's where they made a decision that they will conduct a cross-channel invasion in the spring of 1944. All right, so cross-channel invasion there. That would be Operation Overlord D-Day. We had a third conference to take place, and this was the Yalta Conference. And it would take place, did the right date for you, in February 1945. If you're looking in your textbook on page 734, you can see a photograph of the attendees there, the big three. Here's the same photograph that's in your textbook here. Now, this conference took place in the Black Sea area up in the Crimea at a place which is called Yalta. Of all the palaces where it is, I've not been there. I'd like to go there, by the way. You can see FDR in the center in the photograph, and on this side here is Churchill, and on the opposite side over there is Joseph Stalin. So Soviet Union controls this area, and for FDR, his room that he stayed in, his room in the palace there, it was bugged. And all of his servants that took care of him here were Soviet spies, you know. So anyway, that was that. Now, I want you to take a good, strong look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is in February. Does he look healthy? And I think you would agree with me that he does not look healthy, and he'll be a dead man within 2 months here, you know. So anyway, so a lot of things took place here at the Yalta Conference, and let's go through some of these. And let me get myself back on track here, folks. We don't want to talk about that right now, so let me see where we are. Okay, so we're up here. All right. And a decision was made at the Yalta Conference by the big three, that's Stalin and Churchill and FDR, to establish a United Nations, not a League of Nations. And in fact, we still had the League of Nations, not very effective, you know, but the decision was made to create a United Nation. It would have a Security Council that would consist of the United States and Great Britain and France, the Soviet Union, and Nationalist China. That is free China. Now, each one of these countries here would have absolute veto power. So if the entire United Nations agreed upon a resolution and the United States was unhappy with it, we can veto it. And remember how the League of Nations was never ratified by the Senate back in 1919? Well, now we're going to find the United States Senate will ratify U.S. membership in the United Nations by a vote of 80 to 2. All right, so anyway, that's it, the United Nations here. And let's move on here. A big decision that came out in the Yalta Conference was that of Poland. What do we do with Poland? Poland had been taken over by the Soviet Union. Poland had been formerly a democracy. And so what they decided to do was to allow a communist government to maintain its stand, to stay in place there in Poland with an effort to work towards democracy. Well, that's not going to take place here, my friends, for another 45 years. Another decision that was made, Germany would be divided into 4 zones of occupation. There would be a U.S. zone, a Great Britain zone, a French zone, and a Soviet zone. All right, so I want to show you this. You can look in your textbook and see this, but I want to show you on my map here of these zones. Let me get myself oriented here. Now, what you're seeing is a map of Germany. Disregard the one to Japan. And this is a map of Germany. All of that here is Germany, so it's kind of hard to get a perspective on that. And like I said, Germany was divided into 4 zones of occupation. Over to the east, we had the Russian zone. This was the Russian zone. The British zone was to the north. One of my friends, later in the 1950s, he was part of the British zone over here. The U.S. zone is down here. That's where I was stationed in 1972 and 1973. And the French zone is down here. Okay, you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Germany's divided into 4 zones of occupation, so it will never be able to unify and come back as a threat to peace here. Now, what do we do with Berlin? Because here's Berlin. Berlin is over in the Soviet sector. So the decision was made to likewise divide Berlin. 4 zones of occupation. 4 zones of occupation. We would have over in East Berlin, that would be controlled by the Soviets. And then the American and British and French sectors would be present right here. There was a connection, and it was a land and rail connection that went across just like this. All right, a lot of checkpoints there, and you just couldn't freely move over into the communist area. So the eastern part of Germany is going to remain as communist, along with the eastern part of Berlin, but not the western part of Berlin, nor these zones here. Now, I'll tell you, to the distress of Stalin, at a later time, the United States zone and the British zone and the French zone all united with each other. And that's the way it was when I lived there in 1972. All of that was just the, shall we say, the friendly side, pro-democracy side. All right, but over Berlin, it remained that same way. Okay, so let's see what else is going to take place here at Yalta. I mentioned that earlier here about FDR dying. Harry Truman became our next president here. Okay, let's move on into our next conference here, which is the Potsdam Conference. It took place in July 45. That's at the Sicilienhof, and I've already showed you the photographs of that, so there's no need for us to go back to that. All right, so let me catch up here a little bit, and let's see where we are here. And we'll go into our next slide here. Okay. Let's see here. All right. Churchill, I told you this earlier, was not reelected as prime minister. Clement Attlee, a new prime minister. And by the way, I just happened to think of this. During the next election, Winston Churchill will be reelected as the prime minister of Great Britain. All right. Now I want to address a subject here which deals with China. We hear about China. Been hearing about it on the news quite a bit lately here. We won't go into that in great depth. I'm sure it's going to gain more attention here in the weeks to come. But the United States, wanted an independent China. Now, China, at that time, was pro-democracy, but it was riddled with scandals. And it was a lot of corruption, scandals there. The leader of China was an individual by the name of Chiang Kai-shek. Now, this is nationalist China. I'll show you what the likeness of Chiang looked like. There he is here. This is kind of ugly, but in the United States, we refer to him as the peanut, because he looked like Planter's peanut, if you know what I'm talking about. But he was pro-American. He was pro-democracy there. And anyway, he was being challenged, if you will, by a communist force. Now, this communist force was led by Mao Tse-tung. I probably wrote the name down. I just got the photograph here of Chiang Kai-shek in front of you here. And the war had actually been taking place between the free world side under Chiang and Mao Tse-tung, the communist leader, since 1927. And many felt like, in the United States, felt like that we were actually supporting the wrong individual and not supporting, that we should not be supporting Chiang, we should be supporting that of Mao Tse-tung, because there was so much scandal and corruption with Chiang. But nonetheless, in 1949, this side here under Chiang, they lost out. And Mao Tse-tung became the new leader of the People's Republic of China, Communist China. And for this side right here, they were able to make their escape, and they went to the island of Taiwan, sometimes referred to as Formosa. And that's where they are today. Of course, Chiang is long since gone, but I had a student a few years ago, and she came from a rather prosperous Chinese family in Taiwan, and she actually knew this man. She knew him. In fact, she told me, she said, on my birthday, he happened to be at my house, and I sat on his knee. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool with that, too. All right, and that's where it stands today here, folks. On mainland China, That is communist. And if you go to the island of Taiwan, that is pro-democracy here. All right, so two different places there. Okay, so let's shall we move right along here. Let's catch some things up. Some of these things I've already mentioned here. Okay, so anyway, you can read through the notes there. That's how to spell Mao Tse-tung if you're curious about that. Sometimes it's referred to as, pronounced as Zedong. Zedong. All right, now I want you to just stop and take a look at things here. And we'll go back to me, so you have to look at the slides there. What's happening to the world? We have the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is communist. It's socialist. It's communist. We have China, People's Republic of China. It is communist. If you look at Poland, it is communist. East Germany, it is communist. Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, it is communist. Hungary, it is communist. Poland, communist, if I think I said that. The northern parts of Korea is communist. So what is happening to the world? It's becoming communist. It is becoming communist. So what can we do about this? Communism, socialism is like a cancer. It grows and it spreads. So what we have to do, we have to hold it in place. We got to keep it in check there. All right, so I want to go back to my camera here and show you this. And a man who was a expert on Russia and the Soviet Union, in fact, he was an American diplomat in Moscow. His name is George F. Kennan. George F. Kennan. People refer to him as Mr. X for a reason for this. This is what he looks like, George F. Kennan, Mr. X, bald-headed guy, but I guess that has no meaning to this whatsoever. But he sent a telegram, and it's a telegram to our State Department in the United States, and it was he signed it as Mr. X, so that's why he gets the title there, Mr. X. And what he was saying here is that the only way that communism can be kept in check is through a policy of containment. We have to hold it in place. We cannot allow it to spread. Now, what this is going to do, this is going to serve to be the driving force, if I can get this straightened out here, this is going to be the driving force for Truman Doctrine, that the United States would come to the support of any free world country that was resisting communist takeover. So, with the establishment of the Truman Doctrine, the United States has now obligated ourselves that if any nation is being threatened, such as Turkey or Greece, of Soviet intervention and trying to take them over and become communist, to include Austria, that the United States will come to the protection of that country. And this is going to drive doctrine for us, for the United States, for a couple of decades. Honest to goodness, you've got to understand this, my friends, or you cannot understand why we got ourselves involved in a war in Korea, why did we get ourselves involved in a war in Vietnam, without fully appreciating the Truman Doctrine. The U.S. will come to any free world country resisting communist subjugation. All right, so let's move on here. All right. Now, some of the popular thoughts at that time, and by the way, the Secretary of State was Dean Acheson, and Dean Acheson was a subscriber, as many people, I can remember this when I was in school, and all our teachers would talk about the domino effect. Here's what I'm trying to tell you, folks. All right, let's play a little game. What I want to do, I'm going to get out a box of dominoes. And you know, we're going to take these dominoes. We're not going to play with the domino game, but we're going to take these dominoes and put them stacked like this, and another one like this, and another one like this, and another one like this, and stack them all in a big line right there. And then I'm going to take my index finger and reach over and we'll tap that first domino. And if I hit that first domino, it's going to topple into the second domino, topple into the third domino, and everything goes falling down. You know that silly little game there. All right, so the domino effect. So if we start with the Soviet Union, who is communist, and it rolls into East Germany, and it becomes communist, I should say Poland, and then we have East Germany, then what's going to happen to West Germany? Communist. What's going to happen to France? Communist. What's going to happen to Belgium? Communist. What's going to happen to England? Communist. What's going to happen to the United States? Communist. You get the idea? And that was a prevailing thought with this domino effect, that one after the other of these countries are just going to fall to communism. And eventually we'll have world communism. So anyway, that's the driving force that we have here. So let's move on here now. Okay, the fall of one nation falling to communism will just lead to another. Now, during this time, The Secretary of State was George C. Marshall, George Catlin Marshall. He'd been the Army Chief of Staff during World War II. Now he's going to remove his Army uniform, he dons civilian clothing, and he will become the Secretary of State. George C. Marshall, a remarkable individual, by the way, and Secretary of State from 1947 to 1949. Now, for George C. Marshall, and this was against there was a lot of opposition against this, but George C. Marshall established a recovery plan. It's called the European Recovery Plan, or more commonly, it's just referred to as the Marshall Plan. And that's what I recommend to you folks to refer to it as. Let's call it the Marshall Plan. And what this will do, this will provide $13 billion. That's your taxpayer money, by the way. My taxpayer money. I wasn't living during this time. And will provide $13 billion to rebuild 17 European nations. Wow. $13 billion US dollars to rebuild 17 European nations. And for many people, they felt like this was just throwing away, squandering United States dollars here. Because we're going to take US dollars to rebuild 17 European nations. And just months ago, we went in and destroyed some of these European nations. But this would include West Germany, not East Germany. No Soviet country, no Soviet-controlled country accepted a dollar of this Marshall Plan money. All right, so anyway, we're going to go in and rebuild these countries to include that of Austria, United Kingdom, Belgium, Denmark, France, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, and many, many others there. As it turned out, it was a stunning success here. And if you go to that part of the world today, you see some West Germany, particularly now East Germany is that way. Of course, they've been unified since that time. We recognize them as a unified Germany. But it's just a stunning transformation, from 1945 to what it is today here. So, worked very well. Remember, in World War I, there was no equivalent to the Marshall Plan, and we in the United States, we just left those countries alone to rebuild on their own, and you saw what happened. Here comes Mussolini, and here comes Adolf Hitler, whatever. Okay, so we also had the National Security Act, 1947. It's a big act here, and I want you to be familiar with it. National Security Act, 1947. It created a number of agencies. We had the Department of Defense. Formerly, we had the Department of War Department, and now we're going to revamp that. It's now going to be known as the DOD, the Department of Defense. We also established National Security Council. It's abbreviated NSC. And this is a task force, so to speak, close advisors to the president that will advise him on foreign and domestic and military policy with that. All right, it consists today of the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Defense are all a part of that. We also are going to create a brand new branch of service. Now, in the past, we've had the Army, we had the Navy, we had the Marine Corps, which actually the Marine Corps falls under the Navy, and we had the Coast Guard. But now we're going to establish, as a result of the National Security Act 1947, the United States Air Force. In the war, the Air Force, the air element, fell under the Army. It was called the Army Air Corps, or the Army Air Force. My dad was a pilot with him in World War II, so he was still in the Army, but he was part of the U.S. Army Air Force, Army Air Corps. All righty, the Air Force. And just recently here, folks, here in December of 2019, we established a brand new branch of service, and you know what it is known as? It is the U.S. Space Force. I love it. I wish I was a part of it here, but that is not going to happen. We also established, as a result of the National Security Act 1947, we created the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, responsible for collecting information through overt and covert actions, to even include spying on our own people here. I'm not a real fan of the CIA. Right now, it's right up there with that of the FBI. Personally, I don't trust either one of those agencies, and I probably shouldn't have said that too. I don't see anything improving in those agencies. I honestly do not. All right, so anyway, let's move on. And by the way, I was a United States Army military intelligence officer, so I think I know a little bit about what I'm talking about with that. All right, on we go here, folks. In 1948, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a communist nation. It was being controlled by the Soviet Union under Stalin. But in 1948, Yugoslavia, who was led by Marshal Tito, a very interesting individual, led a lot of partisan guerrilla groups, against the Germans during World War II. His proper name is Joseph Broz, but he went by the title of Marshal Tito. But he broke away from the Soviet Union, still stayed communist. Yugoslavia still stayed communist, but broke away from the control of the Soviet Union. And for Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, he offered assistance. And as a result of that and several other things, Joseph Stalin, made the decision to blockade Berlin. So this means that all land routes, all water routes are going to be closed. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out by land or water. So what are we going to do? Let me go back briefly here to the map here of Germany, and let's take a look at this. Look at Berlin. Here's Berlin. Here is the free world sector over here. Here's the communist sector over here. If nothing can go into Berlin by land and nothing can go into Berlin by water through the Spey River there, what is an alternative? The air. And that's what's going to happen. We are going to organize 277,000 flights flying in here on the Berlin Airlift, is what it is known as, and we delivered 2.5 million tons of whatever is the necessities of life. Bread, milk, maybe water, baby food, whatever, diapers, I don't know. Just everything that would sustain this city was brought in through this Berlin Airlift. All right, I'll share some photographs with you. I think I'll do it like this. This is one of the many of the 277,000 flights flying, I can't tell whether it's flying into Berlin to Tempelhof Airfield or whether it is actually flying out with that. Read my articles here. I would have this on the bulletin board for you here on the easel. Berlin Airlift has some interesting photographs in here. Children here that are watching, I think that may be the same photo that you saw a second ago. Aircraft here, Tempelhof Airfield, just lining up here to deliver goods or to take off to resupply anyway. And by gosh, that Berlin blockade stayed in place there for slightly less than a year, and then it was just ended because it was not effective. Okay, so let's move on here, see what else is going to take place here. As a result of this, for the free world countries, they will establish what is called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, just referred to as NATO. Originally, it had 12 NATO members, 12 nations. Today, it has 29 nations. And the last one that was admitted, I think it was 2019 with Montenegro. Montenegro was the last one to be admitted into NATO. Everything you ever wanted to know, you can find in a NATO handbook. If you care to read through that, and I don't care to read through that one bit. But anyway, all right, so that was NATO. All pledged that if one nation is attacked, then all the other nations that are members of NATO will come to its assistance. I don't know about Iceland. Iceland has no army. So what happens? If Iceland is attacked, we got 29 nations to come to its assistance. If the United States is attacked, well, Iceland, they'll give us a good luck, guys. Good luck. All right. So in response to this, for the Soviets, for the communist side, they established Warsaw Pact. It was 8 communist nations, which would include the Soviet Union, East Germany, Bulgaria, Romania. I'm just having to do this off the top of my head here. Poland would be a part of that. Yugoslavia was part of it. Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Albania happened to be another. Just happened to remember that. All right, by 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested an atomic bomb. Wow, this is interesting. Up until 1949, the United States was the only nation that had the atomic bomb. Wow, that is good. It's like being the only kid on the block with a 6 gun. But now the Soviet Union had their own atomic bomb. That takes a lot of leverage away from the United States. I wonder where they got their information to develop this atomic bomb. I'm very curious about that. Maybe we need to wait till the next lecture, my friends, before we talk about how the Soviets got their atomic bomb. All right, let's move on here, folks, and let's see what else we have here. Okay, we've got that out of place right here. Now, the war with Japan ended too early. And in fact, it was a knockout blow with that of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So when the war was over, what happens to all these servicemen? We got 15 million people in uniform, and they suddenly are poured back on the streets here in America. And for many of these individuals, they don't have a lot of money here, and they would like to get houses, and they would like to get an education with this. And so what took place here is that Congress passed and the President signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, 1944 here. Some people refer to it as the GI Bill of Rights. 1952, the name was changed here to the Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act, but people still to this very day refer to it as the GI Bill. Now I want to close here in a second, but I want to tell you about my dad, and I want to tell you about myself here. You probably don't care about that, but I want to tell you particularly about my dad. My dad grew up in Zanesville, Ohio during the Depression years. He had nothing. He graduated from high school, Lash High School, and his father, my grandfather, wanted him to be a barber. He said, well, that's, everybody needs to have a haircut one time or so in the year, so that'd be a good profession to go into. And that's what my dad was going to go into. He was going to be a barber. I don't know if any of you knew my dad. But anyway, so World War II broke out. And my dad went into the Army and served for the duration of the war. He enlisted. He's very proud of the fact that he enlisted. He was not drafted. Served for the duration of war, and after the war was over, he was entitled to the GI Bill. Went to school, graduated from Ohio University, not Ohio State, and came to the South. In fact, he served in the South during the war. That's where he met my mother, by the way. They were married 6 weeks after they met each other. Met at the University of Alabama. My dad was going through flight training there at the airfield that's in Tuscaloosa, and later got a job teaching here in Birmingham, Alabama. We lived in Inslee for a while, and then my dad got a master's degree, and GI Bill paid for all of that. Okay, and that's great. And my dad became president of Walker College here, and served as president there for, I think it was 38 years. All right, so anyway, very, very successful individual. If you ask him, he would tell you my success is due to the GI Bill, to World War II, the Army, and GI Bill. All right, so I firmly believe in that. You take me, for example. Now, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but my parents were fairly well off. And I went to Walker College, and I went to Walker College because my education was paid for with that. Went to University of Alabama. My dad paid for my education. University of Alabama. I was in a fraternity. That does not come cheap. My baby brother, a year behind me, did the same thing. Went to University of Alabama, same fraternity I was in. And anyway, so I graduated. When I graduated, the Vietnam War was going on at that time, so I had to go into service, and tell you more about that at a later time. I spent 2 years in Germany. I was very fortunate. I didn't go to Vietnam, and when I came back, I was entitled to the GI Bill. I already had my bachelor's degree, but the GI Bill paid for my master's degree in biology. It paid for my PhD, and I owe all of that to the GI Bill. So I don't understand why you folks are not up at the recruiter's office right now just signing up for a hitch. Never hurt me a bit. Never hurt me. In fact, I benefited from it very, very greatly. My dad owes his success to it likewise here. So I'll meet you folks up at the recruiting station right after this lecture. Alrighty, folks, we're going to stop for the time being here. I've talked to you for about 53 minutes. We're going to stop for the time being, and when we come back, we're going to move on with Harry S. Truman and his fair deal. Alrighty, thank you.